Call.
May I have a motion that we only discuss those 4 items for which we went into closed session? One item under Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1, discussion of a personnel issue concerning an appointment. One item under Virginia Code 2.2-3711A7, consultation with legal counsel pertaining to an actual or threatened litigation. And 2 items under Virginia Code 2.2-3711A8, consultation with legal counsel pertaining to a contractual matter, and a consultation with legal counsel.
So moved.
Second.
And may I have a roll call for that, please, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Penn?
Yes.
Mr. Dawson?
Aye.
Mr. East?
Aye.
Mr. Radcliffe?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Mr. Reed?
Aye.
And do we have any modifications for public session? I don't think so. Any of you know? Okay. All right. I'd like to welcome all the guests and visitors that are here tonight and online. Thank you for being here. We'll start out with the consent agenda. If you all would look at July 6th, 2021's council meeting minutes, to look over it, and if I can get a motion to accept them.
So moved. Second.
And may I have a roll call for that, please, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Penn?
Yes.
Mr. Dawson?
Aye.
Mr. East?
Aye.
Mr. Radcliffe?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Abstain.
Mr. Reed?
Aye.
All right. Now, we'll move on to the recognition of service of Sergeant John F. Leeper upon his retirement, and that's going to be Resolution 2021-35. If Mr. Leeper would like to come up, and his family, if you want, and friends come up, but whoever wants to come up is fine. Resolution 2021-35, resolution honoring Sergeant John F. Leeper upon his retirement from the Pulaski Police Department. Whereas the Town Council of the Town of Pulaski, Virginia wishes to commend those employees who upon their retirement have rendered a career of service to the Town of Pulaski by giving of their time, talents, and expertise in service to the community and its citizens. And whereas Sergeant John F. Leeper has served a combined total of 49 years.
49 years.
You told me you were 29.
No. 20 years in the Army.
Okay. As a member of the U.S. Army and Pulaski Police Department in a career dedicated to the defense of the country and the protection of welfare of the town's citizens in spite of hazards and dangers involved. And whereas Sergeant Leeper served 20 years in the U.S. Army, retiring in 2004 with the rank of Sergeant First Class, after serving in the 82nd Airborne, the 2nd Armored Division, Hell on Wheels, the 29th Infantry Division, the Blue and the Gray, and the 24th Infantry Division, the Tara Division, during which he was deployed to Iraq and later to areas damaged by Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Isabel. And whereas Sergeant Leeper joined the Pulaski Police Department on January 27, 1992 as an officer and served with distinction in the Patrol Division as an officer, corporal, sergeant, and lieutenant, and in the Investigations Division as a lieutenant of investigations for narcotics. And whereas, as a valued member of the Pulaski Police Department, Sergeant Leeper was awarded the Gallantry Star, 2 unit citations, the Honorable Service Award, and his name Squad Officer of the Year 4 times. And whereas Sergeant John F. Leeper will retire July 31st, 2021, after completing 29 years of service as a valued and distinguished member of the Pulaski Police Department. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Town Council of the Town of Pulaski, Virginia, setting in regular session this 20th day of July, 2021, that the Town Council extends its highest thanks and commendations to Sergeant John F. Leeper for his mentorism service to the Town of Pulaski, Virginia, and his country. Be it further resolved that the Town Council and town employees extend to Sergeant Leeper their greatest respect and best wishes for a well-deserved and enjoyable retirement. This resolution will be effective upon adoption and will be adopted this 20th day of July 2021 by the duly recorded vote of the Town Council of the Town of Pulaski. And may I have a motion for this, please?
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to adopt resolution 2021-35 as written.
Second.
And may I have a roll call for that, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Penn?
Yes.
Mr. Dawson?
Aye.
Mr. East?
Aye.
Mr. Radcliffe?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Reese?
Aye.
Would you like a picture with all of your fellow colleagues as well?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let the gentlemen and ladies come and be a part of a
I like
picture.
getting out of this.
Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate. I'm not sure we can get them all in one picture now. I didn't realize we were gonna take the whole audience. Rebecca, did you want to get up there as well?
I'll let him do this. Let's see, if I can get right here. You're all right. I'm good.
Rebecca, do you want me to take the picture for you so you can be in it?
Sure, we'll find
You need to be up
We could take more
I
than
was gonna
one.
let him.
Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you. How to get to the house? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, he's there,
He's
okay.
in.
Okay, here.
Right. We'll move on to our presentations. First up would be Pulaski Area Transit, Kimberly Horn Consultants.
So thanks for having us again tonight. Tonight, we're just here to talk about the feeder route that we've been talking about adding to the stop for going on a year and a half now. Thankfully, we're hopefully getting over COVID and can move forward with this. So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk, with Kimberly and Horn tonight, but, so in your packet that Dave's handing out, we'll have our current bus routes, the A and B route, and then you'll have the proposed feeder stops, and then the paratransit maps that, this is Mike Schindledecker. He's our consultant with Kimberly Horn, and he's helping us, work on this, change, this added thing, so that we can take those outlying areas still of Pulaski where those people can't get to those bus stops that we have now. So we'll have this feeder route that can bring in people to the feeder route to help grow ridership even more than what we're having right now. I also have Candace Draper here. She's the, my assistant, so she'll also be helping answer questions if we have questions along the way. So we don't have a PowerPoint presentation, we just have the paper copies today. So I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Monica. Good evening, Council. Thank you for having me today. What I wanted to come here and talk about specifically is our public engagement plan for our rollout of these new routes. It's very important that we individual that this impacts, and we originally had us on board a year and some ago. So we waited till we can do this in person following the COVID-19 pandemic because it's just that important. We want to make sure we're getting everything. So in front of you, you have a few of the materials that I brought with me today. I'm not going to step through detail each and every one of them. I just want you to be aware of them and be able to provide feedback through staff or directly to myself if you so wish. I tend to talk a little quick, so tell me to stop and slow down. Please feel free to interrupt. There's no need to be too formal with me. So the main document here is this one, the public outreach strategy. This documents our entire work for how we intend to engage with the public, the types of information we're trying to receive from them, and the manner in which we're going to present the route changes to the public. The first of the three main activities is this here today, town council meeting. We'll solicit your input and feedback, but also we look to you to advise us on how we should be engaging with the public, with individuals, what types of questions we should be asking, and that sort of thing. The next two activities will occur on September 1st of this year. The first of which is focus groups. We'll hold two unique focus groups. It'll be comprised of individuals that staff has had interactions with, people who this impacts the most. We'll get a chance to talk with them, get very real feedback, very real input, and have their voices heard in a very intimate setting. The third and final way we're collecting feedback is just an open public meeting, the evening of September 1st, where we'll have an open house format. We'll have these maps on display, and then staff and myself and my colleague will be there to answer questions, whether it be clarifications or feedbacks on the changes. So then I'll have you turn your attention to each of these maps. These three represent, as Monica said, the existing routes, the proposed future conditions map, and then the paratransit map. These will be on very large 2-foot by 3-foot boards with staff members next to them to describe what's going on in the maps and answer questions about them. Monica and Candace, let me know that you have at least heard of the changes. If we need to, we can answer questions about them now, today. Otherwise, these are mock-ups of what will be displayed during the public meetings.
Can I just add on to that? I would also encourage any of you all to come out on September 1st and just to be there during these engagements. If anyone's interested in doing that, we would love to have you all there too, just to be there to be involved.
Have you identified the location and time for that evening meeting yet?
We're
Is that
gonna
in the
do it.
material?
The meeting, the public meeting will be from 4:30 to 5:30 at the County IT Building at 80 Commerce Street on September 1st, 2021.
It's right there.
She doesn't have
All of it.
Yeah.
Do you want this one?
If you'll pass these over to her. Darn it.
And I apologize to council that the date there says 2020. We are not going back in time to hold this public meeting. It's
Dave.
2021.
Dave, right there, so she can have the packet.
It's okay, we have it next door.
Yeah, plenty of copies. I don't want to go too in-depth into each one of these. It's all detailed in this packet. If you have specific questions, please feel free to bring them up. In general, the focus group will flow through a description of what's going on, what the proposed changes are, solicit feedback, and then, like I said, the public meeting will be open format, where individuals can come up and we can explain the entire process to those who want to engage. So I'll go ahead and pause for questions from council or others.
I just have a quick question. So the purposes of the meetings, I understand, is to engage the public with potential of changes, right? So that means it's not completely set, completely defined currently, and that means if there are, opportunities to improve, then we need to hear about them, and that will give you guys the ability to potentially find the way of accommodating if it was possible.
I'll tell you what we did, just to give you kind of an overview, is we took the areas that we took away. Like, there was a lot of areas in the outlying areas of the town that lost service when we had to go to the fixed route. So what we tried to do with this is we took the main in all corners of those areas and tried to incorporate those in this. And in the focus groups and the meetings, what we wanna see is this going to put that service back in place for you, or are we missing somewhere? Because I know we haven't hit everywhere, but we've tried to hit at least the corners and close to the areas. We went as far out as the Gator Mart on Robinson Track, up to Highland Terrace. We had a lot of pickups there at those apartments out towards Case Knife. We tried to hit every corner of the town that we were missing. So yes, the public meetings, we're hoping that if there's somewhere that someone sees we completely missed an area, we wanna know that, because we did the best we could to try to incorporate those areas, but.
Which I think is awesome. I truly do appreciate y'all in trying to engage it in that way, to make sure that if there's anything that can be done, that you get a chance to hear about it. I was, second question was, I guess mainly to understand or try to understand how those, feeder route stops that you guys are looking at or have kind of thought out a little bit. How is that gonna work from a timing standpoint? Will that be a once a day area, or what's the frequency or timing for those additional stops? How will that work? I understand how the route system works, but how will the additional feeder routes work?
Do you want me to speak on that, or do you?
Please.
Okay, the plan is, and of course, we'll have to ride those routes to see what the timing is gonna be, but they're gonna be on their own loop. So it'll be a continuous loop
An
throughout the
additional
day. And what that loop will do is, and you can see on the proposed feeder stop, there's two groups. One of them only has 3 stops, but it's because it's so spread out. So, the bus will wrap around those stops and then drop off at one of the meeting points, either Walgreens or Dollar General, and then continue to make that loop so that the people can utilize the town transit route throughout the day and then keep catching that route to get back to their stop. So it won't be just a one time a day thing. It'll run on its own loop like the transit.
During the same
Does in
time,
the town.
during the same
Mhm.
time frames as the
Yes.
change of this current, so you're basically putting 2 additional buses on the road each
Without
day.
the extra cost, because we're taking, what we plan to do is, we've combined the town route into one large route.
Mhm.
And we're gonna run 2 drivers in opposite directions, so the stop times will be around the same, but it'll be on one large loop. And then we're taking the other 2 drivers off of that route and putting on the feeder routes. So it's adding those 2 routes without adding additional cost of drivers and staff time.
And then those people that are already on those 2 routes right now won't have to transfer if they wanna go to the other side of town.
Gotcha.
You say you going as far as Gator Mart, what kind of schedule would that be on?
It'll be on a loop schedule, so the time frame, we'll have to figure out the time that it takes for that bus to circle through that loop, but it'll be multiple times a day. So once we get that set schedule, there will be a schedule put out, so that individuals know if it's every hour, if it's every 45 minutes, they'll know how often that bus will be there.
Thank you.
I just have one more question. So with the combining of the 2 routes that were downtown, and I understand what you said, the stop frequency will be the same. I'm assuming that makes, if somebody picked up on one spot of that route and rode all the way around, that it probably would double the time.
Well, they're gonna be
Divide all
going
of us.
counterclockwise, so if they need to go to a certain part of town, the driver will be able to let them know which direction they're going, so that it'll be kinda like a half loop that they can go on. They don't have to ride the full route. They would just tell the driver if they're going to one part of the town, they'll wanna catch that driver, cause they're gonna be going counterclockwise. So there'll be a driver going each direction.
Do you mean to say that one's gonna be going counterclockwise?
Yes, and
and
one will
one's
be going clockwise.
So they're
Yes,
so if you wanted to go 2 stops over,
right.
you
They
don't wanna
wouldn't
catch
have
the
to
one that
ride the
goes
whole
10
circle.
stops, you can just wait for the one that goes 2
Right.
stops.
Right, and the buses will be, we have the scrolling signs on them that'll tell the individuals which direction that they're going.
Okay.
If they're going downtown or if they're going towards, that'll be noted, and the drivers are good at letting people know too, which direction they're going.
And will these materials be on the buses so that the people who are riding and then push out? Because I would like to. I think if we pushed it out on social media, that would be great too. Because
Yes.
making sure, because not every, with 4:30 on a Wednesday, I guess it is.
Right.
It might not work for it. So just is there going to be opportunity for that kind of feedback?
Yeah, we'll collect feedback for up to 2 weeks following the public meeting.
Okay.
So the last piece of paper you had in there was a survey. Individuals are welcome to fill this out and provide feedback to us, and we'll collect that and aggregate that, and take into consideration.
And then will that be available for people to click on, like an electronic version, like a SurveyMonkey or something like that?
Yeah, we are doing electronic surveys.
Okay. Because I just think people will more likely to, while they're waiting at a bus stop, just to click on something.
Sure.
My experience. At least.
Where's your office located now?
What's that?
Where's your office located?
My office?
Hmm.
Y'all's office.
You mean our transit office?
Yeah.
Our transit office is located in the Beans and Rice building,
Who's that?
in the Beans and Rice building, right near Bluegrass Apartments. And we're in, due to COVID right now, their office doors are still locked, but, in the future, come September, if somebody rings the doorbell, the dispatchers will go to the front door and assist them as needed. I've already talked to, Lee at Beans and Rice, and she's gonna work with us on that.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
If you have any other questions or comments, please filter them through staff and I'll get them.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Does anybody else need a copy?
I do.
Excuse me. All right, we'll move on to the, let's see, review of legislative changes relating to law enforcement. Chief Neets.
Evening. I promise this will be brief. Ms. Bertram asked me to kind of go over a few code changes that are gonna be affecting our enforcement and service to the community. And I know that you guys do receive some comments from the citizens on certain things like decals, inspections, things of that nature. So I kinda wanted to let you know some of the changes that were coming forward. So March of this year, we had quite a change to the traffic code, and I'm just gonna read what they are, just the language right out of the code for you. And then July 1st, we had some changes that repealed some criminal offenses. So I just want to give you some highlights, and if you want some more information later, you can get with me, I can clarify, but there were about 500 changes to the Virginia Code. So a lot of information. So let me jump right in. So the traffic code, the most significant changes that we had were, we have primary offenses, which is an offense that we can stop you for because it's an offense just in itself, like having a headlight out. So these things, primary, went to secondary, which means we have to have an interaction with you for another matter like speeding. Does that make sense? Okay. So these offenses were once primary, went to secondary, and that's without a light illuminating a license plate, with defective and unsafe equipment. That's just the language. It's very open-ended. Without brake lights or a high mount stoplight, without an exhaust system that prevents excessive or unusual levels of noise, with certain sun shading materials and tinting films, with certain objects suspended in the vehicle. And the code says literally after that, a second offense is one for which a summons can only be issued if the offender is stopped for another separate offense. Including those changes, which are kind of all safety changes if you kind of heard the language there. Law enforcement officers are not permitted to stop a motor vehicle for an expired safety inspection, registration sticker until the first day of the 4th month after the original expiration date. So some significant changes to the code, and it will affect how we provide, in my opinion, and probably the opinion of our department, some safety measures for the roadway. There were a couple other repeals that you might want to know about. The enhanced punishment for repeat larceny. Second or subsequent offense is no longer in effect. And if you didn't know this, petty larceny has to be over $1,000. It's only a felony if it's over $1,000. I didn't know if you guys knew that and how that affects our businesses, frankly. Suspended driver's license for free to pay fines, those have all been reinstated, and there is no more habitual offender act. Those are some of the highlights that affect how we'll service the community on what we really think are safety measures as far as how your vehicle is inspected. And since I know that those things are addressed with you on occasion, we thought we would come and bring them to your attention so you might have that information going forward. Does anyone have any questions? That's it, it's brief. There's a ton more, but we'll keep it to that.
No questions, just tears.
Well, we'll see how it impacts us. We'll do the best we can going forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we'll move on to our presentation, proposed changes to the rental inspection program. Who's, is that?
Might as well just go on to the next one. Public hearing, I guess.
Okay. So I guess we'll move on to our public hearing. Appropriation of LGIP funds, resolution 2021-36.
We need a public hearing first. This was
Let's
transfer
see.
of funds have been
Yes.
investment pool to
So I'll need to go first for the.
general fund.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, well, we need the staff report first, right?
Here on the side, but basically, as I understand, this was a transfer, there's some funds that have been collected in the investment pool, LGIP for some time, and administration would like to take part of that and put it into the general fund balance, and also to place some in a block grant category. I'm not sure which one.
Oh, yes. So do you want me to, should we go back first to that last one maybe? We're gonna go back for it. We'll go back to it and then we'll come back to, yeah. Someone somebody disappeared. We need the proposed changes to the rental inspection program, so.
Yes, and we have
so-
the folks here now. I wanna just, introduce the subject and then, both Carla and Jessica will explain the changes. We actually have advertised for public hearing, for your next meeting, which is August the 3rd. The required public hearing to make these changes because it does represent a change from the existing rental inspection districts that you've had in place for a number of years, but not necessarily used on a consistent basis. In fact, that's also the case with your vacant building registration program. While you've had it on the books, we have not used it in a consistent manner, and so actually in the next several days we will be sending out letters to all of the vacant property owners asking them to comply with the registration requirement as of the 1st of August. But the rental inspection program is one that many years ago, and it continues today, to identify areas of the town where we have already seen blight occurring, or where it appears to be on the path to go into a blighted condition if there's not some successful intervention. And so with the passage, hopefully, of that ordinance revision on the 3rd of October, we will begin initiating that inspection. Currently, those inspections are done on a complaint basis, but we will be visiting every rental unit in the town in these areas over the next year or two, depending on how quickly we are able to go to the property. So kind of with that as an introduction, I want both Carla and Jessica to share with you and answer any questions that you might have about those proposed districts. There will be 2 in the future rather than the 3 smaller ones. And with that, go ahead, and you've got some maps, I think, that you want to share. So now,
And I'm just curious while they're getting set up, as far as the rental schedule, I know you're probably gonna be working on that, maybe this question's better suited for them. Is there gonna be a methodical approach? I mean, the thing we ran into before when we originally, had the resolutions to go ahead and have the rental districts, it became a manpower issue, I think. So I was just curious of what the approach is going to be.
actually, at least initially, it will be based upon how quickly we get a response from the property owners to go do those inspections. And I'm confident, because I'm familiar with this program in other communities, that some people don't respond, and it will take multiple correspondence with them. And then at some point, with some properties, we'll just have to go in and do the inspection without the property owner being present or necessarily with their permission. And all of that is allowed, those multiple steps, by your current code. Now, becomes overwhelming, you know, that everybody wants to be inspected at one time, then obviously we'll have to modify that. But I don't anticipate that at all, and we will be giving several months to give people the opportunity to get back to us to schedule those visits. But I will also say to you that in anticipation of this ordinance being implemented in a more consistent way, Jessica, who currently serves primarily as an assistant to the building inspection function, will be splitting her time between building inspection and the code enforcement, and that's directly related to the implementation of these two programs. So in effect, we're adding some staff, at least on a part-time basis initially. And as we go through it, if we see that there's a need for additional staff, I'll certainly be back to you. I'm kind of hopeful that our building inspection function will increase over time, and we'll need additional staff in that area as well as the code enforcement area. And those are, in my mind, two good problems to have.
Sure.
But we won't address those until they become absolutely necessary.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious. It's a large area. So.
And the communication side, just make sure I understand, when you're talking about communicating with the property owner about scheduling time to do those things, the actual individuals in the rental properties themselves, I assume if I was, you know, if there's gonna be rental property, you know, folks that are living inside the property that's not gonna be excited about, you know, people coming in and inspecting a rental property. How is that process handled as far as, is the owner of the rental property, the one that's responsible for notifying the
Yes.
resident?
Yes.
That that's gonna happen at this date or something that nature? I understand the purpose of it is not.
And
it's
sometimes that'll have to
construction.
be negotiated, you know, that the property owner will talk with, their client saying, you know, let's get to the schedule for such and such a date, and the tenant will say, well, that's an impossible date for me because I've got to go on a job interview or whatever the issue is, and we can reschedule. The important thing is to get permission to go in at a appointed time. And I'm sure that there are gonna be some tenants who won't necessarily like that, but clearly that is, usually, in contracts or lease agreements, the property owner has the authority to inspect at any time. I think I've told the council previously that we started, shortly after the first of the year, passing out, the equivalent of a flyer every time an individual came in for a utility account that was in fact a tenant. And the material listed both their responsibilities as a tenant and the property owner's responsibility. And one of the first things that we encourage is that everybody have a lease. And we find that's not always the case. But there are certain responsibilities of the tenant to keep the property in good condition, and there's also responsibilities on the property owner's part. And we do occasionally now get complaints from tenants, and we do go out on those complaints irrespective of where they're located in the town. We don't have to be in an inspection district for us to do that on a complaint basis.
I think regarding the tenants, I would think that the more time we can get, you know, because you're going to have a three-way scenario there where the town's trying to coordinate with the property owner is trying to coordinate with the tenant. So if there's some way, I think we need to have a vision, and I know this is all just kind of starting up or have a schedule that's multiple weeks out. And I think that will make it a lot easier on both the tenant and the property owner.
And we'll
Trying to
only be
coordinate
able to
those
schedule
things.
so many visits a week based
Right.
upon manpower.
Right.
Yes, I have a question. How are we identifying rent? I mean, besides when people come in and pick up, we know some people are renters, but we don't know everybody, especially if they're long-term renters. How do we identify properties that are rental properties?
The water department helps out with that as well,
Okay.
with identifying those, because the landlords will have it under their name and the tenants will be coming in and paying for the water bill.
Okay.
The ones that may be difficult are where the property owner collects and pays for the utilities and then charges.
Right. No, that's what I was thinking. Is in
Yeah,
those
and
cases.
that will be the
the-
more difficult one, but, I think we'll have plenty to do
Okay.
over the next year or two.
No, I was just curious. It was just sort of. I was just thinking, you know, are we sending out like a flyer to everybody in the district just to see, or is it more just that we have a certain list already?
Jessica's been working on that for several months.
Okay.
In conjunction with the utility department, and we will of course do quite a bit of promotion of it. So
Right.
that if there's a tenant who's in a piece of property, they may very well call us and say, when is my
Right.
apartment or house gonna be inspected, and it may or may not be on our list.
Right. Okay.
But I can't say that we're gonna hit 100%.
No, I didn't expect, but I was just curious about the method that was being used. I think I would guess that most people would just be curious how that's going to be identified.
And that's the old rental properties where they were consolidated down to the bottom. Anything with the pink, that's an identified rental property. And that's just that first section of the district. that we're proposing.
And I think I've explained to the council previously, and you're probably aware that you cannot have the entire town as a rental inspection district. You have to, make, a decision that the particular areas that we've identified do in fact represent areas, not necessarily all the areas, but identify areas within the town in which there already is blight or movement toward that. And that's part of the ordinance that you will be adopting on the 3rd of August, is a certification to those facts. And if we find, in doing the work, that a portion of the area may no longer qualify, you know, then we can certainly come back and you all can modify the district. And there may be times in the future where we want to add additional districts. But these ladies are prepared to make a presentation, so we'll have to go through any of that and explain how you maybe, pick these districts, kind of windshield surveys that you're doing, mostly windshield surveys.
The windshield surveys of
Yes.
what's leading, oh.
Sorry, yeah. Microphone there. Thank you.
So while Carla and I were out doing the windshield surveys of the districts, we were finding a lot of roads leading into our downtown that were really wanting to emphasize beautifying and everything, where a lot of the buildings were in disrepair, a lot of blights going on. And other than being vacant buildings, there's also a lot that are rental properties that need a little bit of, I guess, attention right now before they go downhill more and cause a problem with health and safety to our citizens. So that's what we're gonna be focusing on first, so. But you all were given the idea of the area. It's marked in red on the big map right there. And then we'll be sending out to all the identified properties a letter with the registration, along with a list of what we'll be looking for during our inspections, along with the fees, what the landlord's obligations are to fixing it, and just trying to be as courteous and handle this as best as we can.
And I would just say that there are some properties that we will find pass inspection immediately, and they will be given a certificate of approval for 4 years, and then there will be others that have minor corrections. And we'll schedule a time to come back and visit those, and then there may be some that have major issues that will take much longer. And your ordinance will detail the cost for re-inspections after a certain period of time.
One of the concerns that we had originally too was vacant buildings, which you're addressing, which will be a little more complicated, I believe, probably gaining access to. But the concern was leaky roofs, where we had the collapse of a couple buildings a number of years ago, and we wanted to prevent that from happening again, especially on Main Street. And now I don't think Main is Main Street. I can't see my map very well.
Yes, Main Street's on
So
there.
Main Street is included.
Yes.
So I think that was certainly one of the things we felt was really important.
Well, the vacant building registration will merely require register already addressing some of those issues where with vacant properties, we have roofs that are collapsing and other kinds of activities. We won't, and in fact, I think we shared with you all some pictures at different times of some buildings that she has been in where we have done condemnation, and there are some buildings that are slated for condemnation. Unfortunately, she's having to go to court to address some of those. I know one of them you have scheduled to go back in August that we've been after for some
I mean,
time.
obviously, we respect, personal property rights, but just for instance, the building on, the old APCO building on Main Street it was pretty obvious there was some major structural issues going on there as far as the roof goes. And I didn't know what exactly what we can do in that. I mean, you could, in that case, and I know I moved away from the rental or the vacant building a little bit, but in that case, you could cite that just based on a visual, looking in the window and
Sometimes.
seeing mold and
We
water
have
damage.
used a drone on one building,
Oh, okay.
to look at the rooftop and then send pictures to an owner. The APCO building, that you're speaking of is the one on Main Street?
It is, the white
Yes,
brick.
that one has been purchased,
Which is good.
yes.
That is good. Okay. I was curious. Thank you.
I think that's the one that Mr. Jeans brought up at the last
He
meeting.
did,
That he
yes.
thought we should purchase, but thankfully there's someone else who has stepped up and taken on that issue. No throwing.
Yes.
Any other questions on that?
Any other questions of the council?
I'm glad you know. All right, with that, we'll move on to our public hearing section for the appropriation of the LGIP fund to the general fund and the CDBG fund. So, I'd like to first have a staff report on it.
This is the, same source of funds that we, used earlier, by closing an account in order to address some shortfall in our sewer fund. And then we found that there were other accounts where this money has been sitting almost dormant for many, many years, that we made the decision to go ahead and close those accounts and attribute the funds back either to the general fund, as you've seen listed, or in the case of the Community Development Block Grant, there was an account in that name, and so that's where those funds will be allocated. But because they come into the general fund budget and then are distributed, it's required that we have that public hearing. We're having a lot of public hearings recently, because the state code does require that anytime it's more than 1% of your operating budget, you have to have a public hearing. So that's really the purpose of this. We have no intentions at this point in time to use those funds. Obviously, some amount of it going to the fund balance will help us with our goal to increase that fund balance over time. The Community Development Block Grant money will go into that account, and that can only be used for community development related activities, but they don't necessarily have to be in the areas in which the original rehabilitation work was done. And I'm sure we'll find ways to use that in the future.
Does council have any questions about this?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt a resolution.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have to
Yeah,
do,
closed
we
the-
have to do the.
Yeah, open session. All right.
Okay, so now we'll open the public hearing on appropriating local government investment pool fund to the general fund and fund balance and the community development block grant. And if there's no one to speak on it, I declare that the public hearing is closed.
Let's try it again.
Do you have any further comments before we go on? If not, you can go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt resolution 2021-36, resolution appropriating funds into the general fund balance and CDBG as written.
And have a first and a second. And Then may I have a roll call for that, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Penn?
Yes.
Mr. Dawson?
Aye.
Mr. East?
Aye.
Mr. Eccles?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
Okay. Then we will move on to resolution clarifying appropriation of a grant funds, resolution 2021-37. So we have a staff report for that one, ma'am?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, you all have previously appropriated, these 3 grant funds, to a special grant account. You remember we set up a number of those to get them out of the general operating budget last fall. As we have gone through the final phase of, getting ready to sign a contract with the Department of Housing and Community Development, which administers not only the community development block grant funds, but the ARC funds, they have asked for an annual certification by the council that those funds have in fact been appropriated. So this is not a new action. These funds were appropriated back in the fall when we were first notified of the 3 grant sources. But this resolution will be sent to the state to certify that those funds are still in those accounts. And we anticipate getting the contract to move forward on the James Harding project as early as next week. So we can then finally finalize a contract to start the design work on that project.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt res. Do we need a hearing on it?
Well, I was just gonna ask if y'all have any questions for
Oh, sure. Does anybody have any questions?
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
It does
Just wanna-
not need a public hearing.
Yeah, but I was just saying. So then, now you can do, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Make a motion to approve resolution 2021-37 as written.
Second.
And may I have a roll call for that one, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Penn?
Yes.
Mr. Dawson?
Aye.
Mr. East?
Aye.
Mr. Eccles?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Reeves?
Aye.
Alright, at this point, we'll move on to the council comments. So, Mr. Penn, do you have any comments for us today?
No, a comment, but I do have a question. I know you asked the question during the time when we had the pandemic, the DMV had like open performance only. Other places that now open up fully, like we have people who from here to Radford to Pressburg because they're open, wide open. PLC is still by appointment only. Is it someone we can talk to?
I will certainly make a call on behalf of the town. I was not personally aware of that, but, I don't know why we should be treated any differently unless they, like a number of businesses, are having some issues getting people to get back to work or to accept employment. But I'll be happy, Mr. Penn, to check into that and get back to you all.
Building the problem, because I had an appointment, you were there, and there's one other person in there finishing the night, went in, and there's 4 people working behind the counter, and then that one person, and then he helped me, and then when I left, there was one person in the parking lot. So there's something wrong there. The other thing I had was, a lot of people ask me about gas. Having the gas come to install natural gas. And if they're not in a certain area, they can't get gas. Is there any kind of, anybody we can talk to about?
You can certainly talk to them. Generally, it's their decision, as to where they extend, lines. And generally, it's like, almost like cable TV. They'll go into areas where they think they're gonna have sufficient customers, to service the line. But, if you'll get me a location that has a concern, I'll be happy to contact them and see what the issue is.
The only other thing I have is I have a lot of people complaining about the weeds in the Kiwanis Park. I know the, Friends of Peak Creek and the problem with cutting grass or whatever. Kinda, looks like to me it's out of hand. There's gotta be something to do about that.
And I have seen that complaint, and it is an issue of how you're supposed to treat wetlands.
Right.
But very recently, I don't know how recent your complaint was, I know that Mr. Pettigo has talked to Kim Caldwell, who's our public works superintendent, about that area, and I know they're taking a look at it. But it is kind of a difficult situation, and I know in some communities that I've been in, we actually have put up signage that tries to explain to people, you know, what the different, it's not really weeds, but what those different plants are intended to do. But what I'm hearing is the complaint is primarily from the Dora Highway side.
Right.
And so that's what we'll certainly look at first, but we're aware of that. You'll also see some of that, unfortunately, on Route 11, where there is like a little stream there, and it has to be protected on either side. So you see that growing pretty tall, even though the grass itself on the other side of the sidewalk is being cut.
No, one other thing, when you have trees, branches hanging over the right of way, is the property owner's responsibility or is it the town's responsibility?
The trees belong to the town, then it's our responsibility. If it's the property owner, it's supposed to be their name.
Can you make people trim the trees?
If you will give me the addresses, I'll be happy to check them out. I know we have been trimming some trees along some of the major roads recently and getting some positive comments about that, but those have very definitely been trees that we're responsible for.
Well, one of there's really bad is in the back of the fruit stand over here, Monroe Avenue. When you come up, you can't see around the corner there. You have to get in the right of the woods and see the traffic.
And as part of these tours that I know the council is aware that we are taking as a group of employees, we are identifying not just overhanging trees, but trees that are impeding the appearance of some of our signs. You know, that signs are almost covered by the growth, and we've found several intersections where we need to be advising the property owners of at various intersections that they need to cut back their own shrubbery because it's grown up so high people can't see, and they do have to venture out into the intersection. And where I happen to live in town, we had a similar problem, and I advised the landlord that it needed to be cut back, and they immediately cut it back so you had better vision. So I think it's our telling people where the problems are and seeing if they will take care of them. If it's their responsibility, clear if it's our responsibility, we ought to be taking care of it. So again, if you would just give me those locations after the meeting or have a phone call, we'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Mr. Dawson.
I actually just had one similar question that somebody asked me, and in regards to pink, if there was a way for for a citizen to engage or be aware of where I know there's the budgeted amount that's only allots for a certain amount of paving is gonna be able to get done each year. For a citizen to kind of know or make, in regards to what was going to get paved or what our intentions were, if we had kind of some type of plan of these are the ones we're gonna get to these 5 streets this year, and next year we're gonna try and get these 5 streets, just to make it I guess easier to understand where the intentions were, and I guess that would also make it maybe easier for comment to be made into, well, maybe we should look at this one, have we looked at this street?
We are putting together a paving schedule that will be using the money that was allocated from VDOT for last fiscal year, and we're getting ready to do that. I'll make sure that schedule is posted just as soon as possible, not only for the council but for citizens. And I agree agree with you that if we could identify into a future year, that might be helpful too, so we'll look at trying to do that. We also, I would say, and I don't wanna get people's hopes up, but we're looking at some streets that traditionally we would not be paving because they're not VDOT eligible, and that's where the primary, money comes from for paving, but under, the ARPA, regulations, it does appear that certain areas that are in certain census zones that are determined to be distressed, that we can use the money, for some streets, and I've already personally identified at least 2 of those, that I think we ought to be looking at, but we're not prepared yet to announce those, cause we're really waiting for those final regulations to make sure that we're not stepping beyond what is very clearly identified, you know, as eligible activities. But having a schedule and getting some feedback is very, very good. Very recently, I asked the police department to start requesting citizen input on issues related to speeding. And we have gotten like 10 responses already, and they all appear to be very legitimate. So we're looking at either reducing speeds, if that's what's deemed to be the best solution, or doing more enforcement of speeding in those areas. So getting some feedback on paving issues would also probably be very, very helpful. We'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
Mr. East.
Just as a follow-up to Ken's comment, on the right-of-way, you know, the right-of-ways are the entrances to our town, and you mentioned Route 11, where we've had the weeds grow up. This has been a topic of conversation on and off for years. Edgewood Drive is another one, and also Door Highway, as Mr. Ken pointed out. Is there, you know, at one point I recall we had discussions regarding, you know, certain types of things we could use that were approved if we had the right person, like chemically, naturally.
You know, pesticide certification, yes, sir.
Right. Is that still an option, or do we have anybody? And the reason I ask, I mean, it's a difference in my mind between night and day when you drive in on Route 11 and that creek is trimmed and cut down. We'd actually even looked at some type of a large rock at one, I forget the name of it, at one point, but the expense was probably too great, as I recall. But if there was just a way to tame the growth around those creeks, it just makes a tremendous difference if they're not 4 feet tall.
Right, well, we do, in recent months, I can't tell you exactly how many, we have hired someone who does have the pesticide certification. And so, that gentleman has been used, but not on a full-time basis in that capacity. So I'm sure that we have a lot, now as I go out and drive around and see areas, I will certainly point them out to them, but, and they'll take care of them. So if you have some specific areas you'd like us to look at, I'm happy to put them on, the list.
So the 3 that we've discussed are the ones that come to mind.
Okay, and I've written those down.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Ackliff, you have nothing to that?
No, I got a couple things. Bill Pettigo, I talked to Bill Pettigo earlier today. Route 11, at the hospital to the red light. We had another accident down there Sunday. Actually, it was a member of our church got rear-ended, drove down over the bank. Fortunately, he had done dropped his kids off instead of picking them up. I talked to Bill today about maybe a sign. I was going to bring it up to you tonight. Maybe a sign just saying slow down, it's a congested area. That's one thing we can do. Down at the red light, for some reason, we've had several accidents there. We've even had a fatality. Sometime last year, I think it was Neville, a guy got killed there at the red light. It's very, very bad. Here's a suggestion that I would like for you to consider, is take a look at that speed limit. Now, the speed limit, somebody correct what if the speed limit is 35, 40 from the red light to the hospital?
45.
How much?
45.
45, and then as soon as you get past the hospital, it jumps to 55 for maybe 2/10, 3/10 of a mile to the red light. And it's they're going downhill, and you got traffic like comes out of the church. We have anywhere from 45, 50 to 60 vehicles pouring out there at one time, and you got a residence. But when you're going 55 mile an hour around that curve, here's this big intersection. We might want to consider taking a look at keeping that 45 from one red light to the next red light, especially when school starts. My concern is when these buses and these parents start parent pickup, they're actually parked out. I know they're not supposed to be, but you have to do what you got to do. Out on Moorhead Lane, it is a very, very bad intersection there. I don't know the cure for it all, but if it drops the speed and saves a life, I could care less. But he is going to actually look at putting us a sign there prior. Yes, and then if we want to take a look at the speed down the road, that would be fine.
Okay.
I just throw that up to you. Took that for the trees. I want to touch bases with Councilman Penn. He hit it, took it away from me. Door Highway is terrible. Door Highway is terrible. Trees over the road. I went to the drop site with my truck, and it's scrubbing the top of my truck. You have to stay in the center. How hard would it be to consider maybe looking at a contractor to come in this town and cut these trees and cut some of these things back up off this embankment not just for this year, but for the future? I don't know, it's been done for several years, but we have I know we're short staffed. And I know our guys are doing the best they can do. God help them, they are. And so I'm not they'll work on what they can do. But this thing is starting to get a little bit out of hand. We're getting trees in the road, Pepsi Fruit, Walnuts one. I mean, it's just sporadically, but Door Highway's bad. To take a look at that, you put that on your schedule. To do that, Door Highway Park, while we're on it, I think Councilman Riz, myself, is the two that spoke out on that thing. To me, it's just terrible looking. It's a security issue now with all the weeds grown up. They can protect the trees, that's fine, but it's just awful looking. I don't care. I'll just leave it at that. But the water, I don't know if you've been down there recently. The water on this side of the bridge was the Door High. It's not. It's just like laying and it's like stagnant. Because I think you brought it up. The bridge is maybe plugged up under it or something.
Oh, underneath the train tracks.
Yeah, it's just like hung in there. I don't know what the answer to that is. It's just not draining out of there. I was by there the other day and it's just bad. I don't know. But I think you're right on the bridge. It's just built up so far under it. It just has nowhere to go. Might want to take a look at that. And I'll leave. The only other thing I want to do is I want to bring back up our grass ordinance again for next month's meeting. If you could, would you run it off and put it in our packet? I'd like for us to take a very good, serious look at this to move forward, keeping our sidewalks and roads. We spend a lot of money trying to keep this town, trying to clean it up, clean the houses. We just need to take a look at our grass and trees. It's getting bad. If we have to contract, we just have to contract. Because I understand our staff is way over. They're way understaffed, and I don't know how they do what they do. So if you would pass it on. And one more thing for the assistant chief or the chief niece, I hope she stays. I actually sent a complaint to her on Door Highway. The next day, the lady called me back and wanted to thank her. She's supposed to send her an email. She took care of it immediately, and it had to do with alcohol and people sitting on this side of the grass on where it grown up, picnic table there. There were some remarks made, so I passed it on to. She took care of it the next day, so she was very pleased with the outcome on it. And that is one that's a safety issue now. So that's all. Thank you,
Mr. Klontz.
No.
And Mr. Reese.
Oh, just to pick up on that speed thing, I did speak with, I think it was Lieutenant Saul at the police department. Who was very friendly and helpful, and I appreciated just the interaction with him. And I do think that he had said that a number of people have called, and I think that's great that we're addressing those complaints. I think that's something that, especially along Route 11 at Parks, not where Councilman Ratcliffe was mentioning, but further down, I think that we could maybe look at slowing that whole road down a lot. That would be I mean, I know you're all looking at that, but
Yeah, we are already looking.
just for everybody's benefit, that was I think that's and then that was it. Thank you.
I've had a lot of citizens that have gave me compliments about Chief Neese and the police, especially the bike patrols that they've started again. I really appreciate that. They're getting out there where people see them. I think it's a good thing. Had one, well, I've had a couple people ask me at the store about Henry Avenue, if the police could check that
It's on
one.
my list.
I figured it was. You've probably got them too from the same people.
Well,
So-
we toured Henry again
Yeah.
yesterday on my tour.
They speed down that hill apparently, so. And that's all. So now I'll turn it over to you for your report.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I appreciate the remarks of the council on the responsiveness of the staff and understanding the volume of work that they have. I have to say, and I've said this to you all before, and I'll say it again, you have a very dedicated staff. It's small. It needs to be a little bit larger, and I have, with this ARPA money and its regulations, reinstated or will be reinstating 4 positions that we didn't fund in last year's budget, but that do qualify to try to help with some of that. One is the community resource, we're calling it community resource specialist in the police department. It will be a civilian position, not a uniform position, to try to re-engage the community in prevention activities, as well as understanding the role of law enforcement in the community. And you heard from Jaleese, some of the changes that are going to affect the way we can in fact interact with the public. We also will be adding a mechanic with that funding and 2 labor positions to help us in what we call general properties, which will give us more manpower to do some of the cuttings of the trees and the grass and the cemeteries and you name it. There's plenty of work for them to do. I did want to mention that things are picking up as it relates to activities in the town. You probably saw the park being used by the Adair Theater as you came to the meeting this evening, Friday evening, between I think it's 6 and 8. There will be a event sponsored by the Fine Arts Center that will be in front of Town Hall in the park. We have had an offer from a downtown business to sponsor a band concert. We have not worked out the details of that yet, but that was very gratifying to have someone step up and say that they would be willing to offer that to us. The cruise in is still being worked on. We're not sure how that's going to play out. It may be a little bit later in the year because there's some details that have not been finalized, but we expect that to be coming up. And I wanted to just mention, because of this activity on the certification of grant funds, we have been holding off appropriating, which will require another public hearing, the funding that we've been awarded, some $1.58 million for a county school renovation, because we are anticipating a couple of other grants being announced in the near future, and want to go ahead and do one resolution or one public hearing for that. But we did spend about 2.5 or 3 hours today in a meeting getting ready to hopefully get that series of grants moving forward by mid-November. So you will be seeing that in the near future. I did talk with the council and mentioned that we're still waiting for the final guidelines as it relates to the use of the ARPA funds. The final rules will be out sometime in middle August, but I have been working with the staff. We've done a lot of brainstorming, have a series of ideas. We're in the process of finalizing that list for you all to see, but I did want to share with you tonight, if you pass this out, a list of projects that clearly meet the definition of infrastructure, and they are items that were already in our capital improvement plan, or they are items that we know have an urgency about them. And so unless there's objection from the council, we will start the process for getting this roughly $2.5 million in both the scheduling of the purchase of equipment or in getting contractors to do the work. Just as one example, the 2 filters that I know you we placed an order today, and we haven't, it would be December before we would have those filters, in, so that we could then install them. So you'll see on this list, on the left-hand side, those related to the water, projects, and then on the other side, sewer. We want to rehab the 8 water tanks that we have that haven't been painted or rehabbed in probably 30 years. I think you've heard from some individuals about one that was leaking, that we put a temporary repair on, but what would be involved in that is actually draining each one of those tanks in a systematic way, and then having someone go in, repair the inside, make sure that if there's any lead paint that needs to be removed, and then painting inside and exterior. So that's a big price tag of roughly $1,100,000, but it's something that will make sure that the water, when it's produced and held in these tanks, will be in good quality and retain that quality, and will not be a part of the leaking that we've had in the past. You'll see the 2 filters are listed. The air scour is something that needs to be done after those filters are replaced, and there is a requirement for some design work that's associated with that, and certainly was with the other 2. And then there's a new treatment activity that's listed there. So that's $2,251,000. And then on the sewer side, you see that we have both a control system for Chrysler that was in your capital budget. You'll see that we need to have a spare pump in a couple places, replacement of door. All of these are things that are essential to the ongoing use of the sewer activity, even as we are having some identification of where there may be leaks. We also plan to, as we've said before, put someone under contract to do that I&I study for us. But all of these involve some lead time to them in terms of getting equipment to then have implemented or installed. So at your next meeting, which will also be the meeting that we're going to have a discussion of where we are with the comp plan and start trying to get some ideas from the council about where you'd like to see the town going both immediately and in the future. We will also bring with you what we see as an improved list in terms of meeting the eligibility requirements of ARPA. I have had discussions with my counterparts in the region on several occasions now, and we agree that anything that is kind of in the outdoors or encourages people to be in the outdoors would qualify. So we will be bringing back to you a next list of playground improvements at all our playgrounds. Whatever is needed to finish up the skate park, we will be putting under contract a professional firm to give us some designs for that park, as well as look at what is currently on the community gardens for perhaps a mountain bike park or activity, which we think would be not only great for our citizens, but would also be an attraction to the community. And that land is not well used. We have the community gardens there, but not a lot of takers to that. Because of its proximity to the creek, we have some limited activities that could be placed there, and given where mountain biking seems to be going, we think that might be a good use. We'll have more for you on those after we have some plans to look at before we do any investment. We do anticipate that we are going to be able to pour concrete on what I keep calling the GCC site. So we'll have the pad for whatever improvements we decide we want to make for the skate park in terms of new ramps, the configuration of ramps, and those kinds. And I think that's all I had on my list for you today, but you may want to give me your reaction to this list, which is roughly half of the initial allocation.
quick question. So I assume that this tank rehab assumes that we're gonna be doing that plan that Bill talked to us about, where we're taking some of the pumps out of the tanks out of service and reconfiguring. That's assuming that we're doing that, or is that we're gonna be? I'm assuming we're not gonna be repairing tanks that we're gonna take out of service.
And
Okay.
those are really related to the Brookmont project.
Right. No, I understand that. I just want to make sure that that was
Yeah,
clear.
and-
That we're not repairing tanks that we're planning to just tear down in 2 years.
No, in fact, the one tank that we have, the leak that people have noticed is one that will be taken out of service when we do the Brookmont.
And
So
do we know what the time? Do we just have a timeline on that yet, or?
we have been waiting literally for months to get a final approval from the state health department of our
Plan.
what's called PER.
Right.
We were told last week that would sit on the desk of the person in Abington by the end of last week, and then would be forwarded to Richmond. I have great concern about how long that is taking. It's nothing to do with us. It's more, I think, with the staffing and availability of people to do reviews, given what's been happening with COVID. This meeting that I had earlier today that I mentioned was the first time that some of the people in the Abington office from DHCD had been allowed outside of their offices, and it was with the condition that they wear masks. So there are some organizations and agencies that are moving out of the COVID restrictions in a more conservative way than some others. So I do think that's been part of it. We do need to, at the point that the PER is approved, we're ready to sign, a contract and begin the design and subsequently the construction. We will have to go through a public hearing on that in order to consummate the loan package that we have for that. And at this point, given resources, I think we still ought to go forward with that grant loan package from the health department and use these monies that are one-time monies for some other activities to really shore up our systems generally. And very recently, I don't know if we've had a chance to share this with you all, a company came in and used a technology that they used or did use on Mars. Can I tell you all about that? That supposedly can detect where you have water leaks. And that company has been back in with these pictures that they have developed, and they're going to now be field testing to see if in fact that photography that they used on Mars has pinpointed some areas for us. And if that's the case, then we'll be coming back to you all on this list to get those areas repaired as quickly as possible.
This is sort of they're doing like I&I. They're doing like a satellite review and to identify I&I areas where there's leakages. Cool.
So it's going to be interesting to see if that has really identified some significant areas for us, and we may do that before we proceed with an I&I study. Try to go in and do some areas and then see what kind of reduction in loss of water we have as a result of that.
You had mentioned at one point regarding the ARP funds, possibly eliminating some debt, and it sounds.
It's not allowed as one of the options, as that has been refined.
Okay, and even if it was infrastructure debt that was recently.
I think what our option is not to take on, is to pay for new projects without taking on debt and use any additional fund. I think you can like the Main Street project, where we're gonna put in new water lines where we might have taken out debt before, we can use the ARPA funds to pay for that.
So
and then the money we might have paid on that, we could pay off maybe our other loans a little more quickly.
Right.
I think you can do that, but that's my reason.
It was interesting the way this has changed, because early on they said you could use it for that, and I almost salivated when I heard that, because we have a
It did
couple
sound
of
rather.
loans that I think we would be better off to pay off. But then they changed that, and so what we can possibly do is look at, for several years, the loss in revenue to the town, and then, let's say, for example, that's $100,000, just as an example, then we could take $100,000 of the ARPA money as replacement of that lost revenue, and then apply that to whatever.
Did you say $500,000 in lost?
I'm sorry?
You said $500,000 in lost revenue? Is that what you said?
Well, we're looking at how best to calculate that, and actually it can be calculated each year for several years.
Well, that's not, I know this is, you said half of that money, but a portion of, it's $2.5 million, but a portion of this is money we were gonna spend anyway.
Absolutely.
And so we're not gonna spend it now, which means we have the ability to, if we were planning on spending that anyways, we could spend that money on paying down debt. So essentially, we could use our own money that we were gonna spend to use, by making use of
Yes.
these funds to do the things that we were gonna have to do anyways, and that gives us the freedom to use our own money that we were gonna spend on whatever we want. So either, we may have restrictions on this, but
Right.
by using this on everything we were gonna have to spend it on in the water and the sewer fund, we should have the freedom, in the ways that we could do it.
And several of these that are on this list were either in this year or in next year or the following year, and so that's what we looked at first. And you're avoiding debt, obviously, too. And several of these projects anticipated being funded through debt. And so if they are now cash funded through the ARPA, that frees up that capacity either as future debt or as cash that would be applied to debt service.
And I was half-heartedly joking, but as far as when you mention lost revenues, I mean, figuring out how to capture all of that, because it may not be obvious, and I realize you're looking at it, but I think it's important that we.
Well, there's a specific approach that you have to use as part of your calculation. And there are certain things that can be included and things that have to be excluded as you're looking at that. And we're redoing it multiple times to make sure that we're maximizing what that number will be. And each year we can go back. So if there's lost revenue from budgeted this year as compared to the previous year, then we can go back each year for several years. So it's not like we're committed to a certain amount for that entire 4-year period that we're able to use these funds. I will also tell you there's a very strict accounting for it, and each individual activity has to be documented and applied against one of the 4 major categories in the ARPA legislation. So it's far more detailed than was the CARES Act money that we had. Of course, it's a whole lot of money too than what we had with CARES. So I guess with money comes greater restrictions and greater accountability.
Kind of like we do in the federal government. Right.
If we can't get them to approve our Brookmont plans because they don't have enough staffing, I just wonder how they're gonna keep up with that.
Darlene, did we hand out 9?
No, I decided to hold on that.
Alright, if you have nothing else, then I'll just remind you that our next council meeting will be August 3rd, 2021, closed session at 5:30, public session starts at 7. And then August 17th, 2021, council work session, closed session at 5, public session at 6:30. And if I have a motion to adjourn,
So
and all in favor?
Aye.